I've told you about my boys, and I've told you about Pat, but let me tell you about Jody, and let me tell you about Ellen. I think the greatest compliment that any mother can get is the young women that her sons bring to her as future daughters. I have been the most fortunate of mothers. Ellen, Byron's wife, they met because at one time Ellen and her family, that's Howard and Evelyn Alexander, and her brothers moved here temporarily to work on a project with my Uncle Meyer Katzman, by the way, and with my cousin Dan Katzman. And while they were here, Ellen's brothers and my boys became very, very good friends. And at that time, Byron really had a crush on her, but she's a couple years older, and when you're very young, those couple years seem to make, she kind of looked at him as sort of a kid or a friend of her kid brothers. Well, at their mutual cousin's wedding, that was the Alexander's oldest daughter, at Karen, and at that's Karen Alexander. That's a mutual cousin. When she was married to Mark Pilley, who had just become a doctor, why, of course, she came for her cousin's wedding, Karen Alexander, and Byron came for his cousin's wedding, Karen Alexander, and he had never stopped having a crush on her, quite frankly. He dated other girls, but at that time, why, he said, you know, why don't you come out to California sometime? And she said, well, I've got vacation coming, but I don't know. And she said, well, I don't want to ask my father. He said, well, I'll ask your father. So he went over and he said, Uncle Howard, he said, what about if Ellen came out to visit me? I've got this house, there's plenty of room, I can show her around Hollywood and LA. So he said, sure. And so then we got a phone call one night, and it was Byron. And of course we realized the time difference, so Bob and I were already preparing for bed, and he said, I just proposed to Ellen. And Bob was on the other phone. We had phone on each side of the bed. And he said, so I said, that's nice, but what did Ellen say? And I heard a giggle in the background, and she said yes, or he said yes, I don't know. Anyway, so that was the beginning, and they had a most beautiful wedding. Her parents said, you know, whomever you want to invite, whatever you want to do. The wedding was absolutely outstanding. And I did a prenuptial dinner, Bob and I did, and at that time, and I'm going to go back and talk about Jody and Alan's romance, but anyway, Jody, who was engaged to Alan at the time, came up and said, can we have the same thing? Because it really was lovely. And I said to her, if you're very, very good to me, if you'll excuse me, I'm going to take just a little drink of water. And it was a lovely wedding, and they moved to California, and they have 4 children now, 4 gorgeous children. They're all very, very tall, because Ellen is very tall. In fact, Ellen used to do some modeling at one time, and she has a beautiful voice, and she even did some singing. Their oldest is Alexis, and she's currently at Columbia College in Northern California. And they have twin boys, Aaron and Jonathan, at their bar mitzvah. They waited a little bit to have their bar mitzvah. They were 6'2", and they did the whole bar mitzvah from beginning to end. And they have beautiful voices. And they are 2 outstanding young men. And then there's Benjamin. Well, Benjamin is really Byron's clone. And he is just a charming young man. I'm looking forward to a lot of good things from these children. They're all very tall, very handsome, because Byron and Ellen are so tall. And Byron and Ellen have a good relationship. They understand one another, and I love them both. They're okay. They're just fine. I wanted to go back to Jody and Alan's romance. Alan called me. He was at the University of, I'm sorry about my frog, please forgive me, the University of Northwestern, or Northwestern University in Chicago. And one evening, I got a call, Mom, Dad, I met the girl I'm going to marry. And I said, oh, that's nice. And I said, what's her name? And he said, Jody Moses. I said, that's nice, thinking, you know, he hasn't been dating her but just a couple times. Well, she was not all that enamored of Alan Wagner. She'll tell you this herself. I mean, he was okay, but anyway, so she was at the sorority house. She was getting dressed for her date one night, and one of her sorority sisters went up and said, your date is here, Alan is here. And she said, yeah, I'll be right down. And the sorority sister said, Alan Wagner? She said, Alan Wagner? I didn't know it was Alan Wagner that called. Anyway, they went out. And they went out again. And she told me later, she said, you know, that Alan was the first young man that ever cared about what I was doing, that showed any interest in me and my accomplishments as a human being rather than just a girl or a young woman. And they were married in the spring after Byron and Ellen were married. They have 4 children also. I'm going to tell you a little bit about them. Rachel is currently at Harvard University. Rachel has been an achiever, an overachiever. She's always had the highest grade point average in any class she served, in fact, at her grade school, middle school, and high school. And she had early acceptance to Harvard. And I had said to her when she was going to Harvard off for her first year, I said, now, you know, Rachel, you've done so well, and you're editor of the yearbook, and you're this and that, but when you go there, you know, everybody is a Rachel, so don't be disappointed if you get an A- or a B+, or, you know. Well, guess what she did at the end of her first year? She had straight A's. And I told her, I said, boy, you really made a fool out of me. Jason is about 3 years younger. He is also 6'2". Rachel's tall. She's a nice girl, but she's not as tall as Alexis. I've got to take another drink of water. Sorry about this. I wish this frog would go wherever it jumped from. There really is nothing wrong with my throat. Jason is very active in Japanese studies, and he also is interested in skiing, and he's just a joy. In fact, he has Bob Wagner's nature. He's very kind. He's cooperative, and I believe he's something special. Then we have Elizabeth. Elizabeth is younger. She was a surprise, a welcome surprise. And of all of my 8 grandchildren, she's the only one that I would say resembles any of my nature. But she is as devoted to dance as I was to acting and theater. She loves people. In fact, when she was in school, Jody and Alan went to a teacher's conference, and Jody came home, and she was talking. I happened to be in the house at the time, and let's see, Rachel was in the kitchen, and Jody was in the kitchen, and as was Liz. I think Liz was eating breakfast. And Jody was talking to her. She said, you know, your teacher said if you would just, you know, pay as much attention to your studies and your classwork as you do to making friends and to circulating and talking, you would be great. And so Rachel said, don't you know that it's very, very important to make grades, and it's more important than making friends. And Liz turned around to her and said, no, don't be silly. It's more important to have a lot of friends. Well, what can I tell you? I was not the greatest student either. I was a late bloomer, but I think that they'll get a hold of this young lady. In fact, I know they have, and she's doing just fine. But And then there's little Max. Max is Alan's clone. Max is outgoing. Max, by the way, Max is quite an athlete. In fact, at this point, at this young age, he is playing golf with men, with adults. And I had said to Alan, your friends really like to play with this kid? And he says, Mom, let me tell you something. He plays better golf than some of my friends. He keeps his ball on the fairway, and he learned to keep his mouth shut and no. And he just is, he's very devoted to athletics. In fact, I could say he's pretty much the only one of the children. Oh, Rachel was very active in athletics, too. In fact, she was active in everything. So that's the story of my grandchildren at this point. At one time, when I was talking about when Rachel was very small, Ellen said to me, you know, Mom, you talk about the other grandchildren, and Rachel always thought that she was special, and I think she's hurt. So I took her aside, and I said to her, you know, Rachel, you are very, very special. But you know, all of your cousins are very special. And they weren't all born at that time. I said, you see, you have this is your spot in my heart. And this is Alexis's spot in my heart. And this is little Jason's spot in my heart. So you see, and I don't know if the other kids were born, I don't think the boys were born yet. I said, don't you see that everybody has their special place in my heart? And nothing can ever change that. And that's true. And that really is true. They're just all very, as my father used to say, you children are my investments and my grandchildren are my dividends. And it's true. I read somewhere by some comedian that you know why grandchildren and grandparents get along so well is because they have common enemies, their parents, meaning my children. Maybe that's so. Bob and I always played with our grandchildren. We did. Got down on the floor and played cards. Played cars, played games. But when we came, we were their friends, but we were not permissive. We were never permissive. And even to this day, when Bubby comes, we play a lot of cards, we go out to dinner, we go to movies, and we have a good time together. But I'm not permissive. Anyway, one day somebody at a bar mitzvah came up to me and said, do you know that Liz is up there playing blackjack like she really knows what she's doing? And I said, well, she better. I taught her how. There's so much, grandmothers can talk about grandchildren for hours. So I just wanted to tell you a little bit about their personalities and how special they are. And at this time, Byron and Ellen are living in Sherman Oaks, California. Jody and Alan are living in Virginia Beach, Virginia. I spent 9 months this last year working on Jody's campaign for the House of Representatives. She didn't win, but she didn't get beat either. It was just the Republican sweep of this election hit her hard. I really should tell you what my boys are doing just for a minute. Byron he's an internet service provider and he's a consultant in the transmission of sight and sound using technology. Keith he has a master's in neuropharmacology, but he also is in the field of technology, and he is with Sun Microsystem carrying a few of their major accounts. And Alan is a retina vitreous surgeon. This is an eye surgeon, the eye surgeon of last resort. You don't really want to go see him. Of course, I go see him to get my eyes tested. And we consult with him because he is a doctor and he's had to take all of his medical training all the way up because he deals with so many people of major problems. He really is quite knowledgeable in the field of medicine. Jody's an attorney, and I told you Pat is a doctor, and Ellen is a full-time mom, and she does a great job. She's really a great mom. Well, I don't want to say that Jody isn't. She is. And I think I've covered the girls, and I think I've covered the boys, and I've told you about my grandchildren. I've told you about my brothers, and maybe I ought to tell you a little about Sylvia Wagner. Sylvia Wagner, I told you she went to Henry Yates, and she went to Central High School, and she went to the University of Nebraska, and about her experiences in Texas. And she became, of course, the happiest girl in the world when she was Mrs. Robert Elliott Wagner. That was the best. I think I told you a little bit about our experiences in Oklahoma. I held 3 jobs while Bob was going to school. I would work in town. I gave that job up. I worked at the university, and then I worked in a dress shop, and then I would do typing at home while Bob was studying. So, you know, when people look at me now, they see a successful woman. They really don't know how hard I worked, and I have worked in the past. And when times were tough, and of course everybody goes through highs and lows financially, I found out that my friend Ike Friedman, who had a jewelry store, a nice jewelry store in downtown Omaha, was having help, and the only help he used before Christmas is some of his friends. And so what I said to Bob, I came home one day and I said, "Hey Bob, what do you think if I went down and gave Ike a hand?" Because I had done selling when I was in Arizona, when I was in Oklahoma. So he said, "Well, my gosh, he's been good enough to do that. It's the least you can do." So I did. I walked into Ike's store and I said, "Where's the sales book and where do I put my coat?" He says, "Put your coat upstairs. Don't take a sales book. I want you to spend the day just getting to know the store and knowing the merchandise." And that's exactly what I did. I never asked for a job, and Ike never hired me. And I worked with Ike for about 3 years as part-time. I'd work with him before Christmas, and I'd work with him before Mother's Day and before Valentine's Day. And when he was out of town, he'd call me, he wanted somebody else on the floor. That was a fun experience, working with beautiful merchandise and helping people pick beautiful things. And his father, Mr. Friedman, always brought in sweet rolls and made sure we had plenty of coffee. That was a delightful experience. I got a call from a friend that they were looking for someone to develop an advertising department at the Jewish Press. And would I be interested? And I said, "Well, I don't know." Well, I met with my friend Charles Monacy, we lovingly call him Chuck, and he asked me, he told me what they wanted, that at this time they were just taking whatever ads that came in, and they had a little, ad card, but they really wanted someone to develop the advertising department. And I said, talk to Bob about it, because Bob and I always talk before he did anything. And he said, "Why not? You'd be great." Now, as it happened, nobody knew that I was the assistant advertising manager at the Daily Nebraskan when I was in school. But I knew it. And so I wasn't hired for that. I was just hired because I was outgoing, and they thought that I could sell. So I spent 3 years doing that, 3.5 years. And it got to the point where the part-time job was full-time, and I was still being paid part-time, and I was really working very, very hard. And I developed the business end. I raised the prices. I sold the first full-page ads. I really built it up. And then when I left, it went down for a while, and then it was built back up again. And today, the Jewish Press advertising pays for itself. Very proud of it. After that, I decided I wanted to do something new. But I had always been a member of the League of Women Voters. And the reason I joined this is a great story. It was right before a presidential election, and I decided I was not going to walk into that polling place one more time uninformed, or as I said, ignorant. So I decided I was going to be immediately smart if I joined the League of Women Voters, which I did. I went to the first meeting, and I came home, and my brains were exploding. I was so stimulated, and I realized how much I really didn't know. And to this day, I still realize what I really don't know in many ways. So I do love to learn, and I do like to have, as I said, my brains explode. So that was why I joined the League of Women Voters. So then when I left the Jewish Press, I decided I wanted to go back to being more active in the League, which I did. And I held offices in the League, and I worked on different committees. And I was working, then I started working part-time for my friend Mort Zub, who had a dress shop, a lovely, lovely dress shop. And I really liked that, but of course I'd had experience when I was working when Bob was in school. So I really loved that, and it was just great. So I liked that. Then it came time when I really got involved with the League of Women Voters, and I became the president of the Greater Omaha League of Women Voters. At the end of my term, let's see, I was supposed to go out in May, and it was early, and I was walking to a meeting with a friend of mine, and whose husband was on the city council. And I said, you know, I'm going off as president. It'll be great. I can work on his campaign. And she said, well, he's not going to run again. And I said, what do you mean he's not going to run again? He's great. She said, well, the Union Pacific really wants him there more than he's at the city council. I said, well, I guess I'll just have to do it myself. And it was just a throwaway line. And a week later, Hal Dobb, who had just newly been elected to the House of Representatives, was going to open his office. Well, as the president of the League, you had to go, and I was going to go with her. And she said, oh, we have to stop at her husband's office at the Union Pacific, which was right across from the Federal Building. And so what I did, we went up there, and so she said, why don't you wait in his office? So I said, okay, so I'm going to talk to somebody. And I sat down in his office, and he looked up at me, and he said, why don't you run for city council? I said, what? And he said, why don't you run for the city council? You'd be great. And I said, yeah, I know I'd be great, and I'd love to do it, but I don't know anything about campaigning. He says, don't mind, I'll help you. Well, he did. Now, what I forgot is, as president of the League of Women Voters, I had taken a course in campaigning, and I had my whole how-to book. And I did. And I put together a campaign committee of wonderful people. The leadership was great at that time. He was president of a bank here, and he got a campaign manager for me, though he was the campaign chair, and we put together, well, I was elected with bells and whistles for a 2-year term, and I loved it. I just really loved getting up. I loved going down to City Hall. I loved helping people. I was reelected 2 years later, and I continued. The third election, I couldn't campaign as vigorously as I should have, and because I was having a problem with a leg. I couldn't walk around. I was hampered. Anyway, I was not reelected, and I was disappointed. I was not disappointed about losing the election. Please understand this. This was really weird. I was disappointed in losing my job. I loved serving people. The last day of my last council meeting, I literally had a graduation. Usually you just fade off in the woodwork. That's not what happened. I literally had a graduation. They presented me with a plaque. The mayor was there. The governor was there. And I was thanked and I was honored for my service. This never happens to anybody. This is something I will never forget. And this plaque is engraved, and it has a picture on it, and it will go to the Jewish Historical Society. And of course, I mentioned it to Alan. Alan said, well, don't you think that one of your children would like it? And I said, I think the city of Omaha has to know that at one time there was a Jewish woman who served this community and did a very good job and was well respected. Now, I left office in 1987, okay? 1987. This is 2001. Yesterday, somebody said to me, Sylvia, I wish you were on the city council. We could really use a person like you. Do you think that doesn't mean a lot to me? It does. And I don't mean flattery. It meant that I did a job well. And that means a lot to me. Well, I've left out a big portion of my life, and that's theater. I told you that where Liz, Alan's third child, loved dance, I loved to act. I always acted. And I loved theater. So I went there. I was pretty tied down with my kids, as young mothers are, but I saw that they were starting a new theater group at the Omaha Playhouse where they were going to just do weekends, two nights. And it was a short piece called Under Milkwood. So I said to Bob, I want to go try out for it. And he said, well, who's going to take care of the kids, and who's going to do this, and who's going to do... And I said, well, let me do it. And I really want to do it. He said, oh, okay. Just so nothing changes in the house. And I said, nothing will change in the house. Well, I was part of the speaking group in the background. But I had my own little pieces. And there was a blizzard that weekend, so the house was, by the house I mean the audience, was very small. And my brother Bob and Francis made it through the blizzard for opening night. And of course Bob was there. Then I did my little piece, and it was fine. And then I wanted to read for a play when they built the new playhouse later on. And I said, I want to read for this play. And Bob said, well, if nothing will change, and who's going to bathe the kids, and who's going to... I said, you'll see, everything will be fine. And we had a schoolgirl who lived with us that I knew I could depend on. And so I did. I read for the part, and I got it. Well, Bob came opening night, and he saw me. Never again did he do anything about who's going to do this and who's who. He knew I was good. And I was. I have pictures of me in costume of some of the plays. I have my reviews also with me in costume, and they're really great. I enjoyed my theater time. I really did. But when I went on the city council, it had to go by the wayside. I just couldn't commit that much time to it. So somebody said to me, don't you miss acting when I was on city council? I said, forget it, I'm still acting. Anyway, I've taken my talents in communication and theater and public speaking, and I've used them well all these years. I really, really have. And my ability to sell. And it's all based on communication and how to work with people and how to have people encourage them to work with you. So I'm still working on committees. At this time, I'm on the board of Bethel Synagogue. I'm on the board of the Anti-Defamation League, and I also hold a seat on the National Legislative Committee. I'm on the board of the Douglas County Hospital, and I'm their finance chair. I'm trying to think what all the other things that I do. Oh, another thing I'm doing right now is Seven Can Help. When people call in, they have problems, you refer them to where they can get their help. You sometimes have to call the person with whom they're having a problem, see if you can't get it resolved. My life right now is great. When Bob died 6 years ago, I was angry. I was angry. He had no right to leave me alone. We were supposed to live to be 95 and fall off of bar stools or else die together in bed. I mean, that, I always said we should just die together in bed. And he said, yep, but you know that I will die long before you. And I said, oh, don't be ridiculous. Well, my dears, my friends, and those who are watching, he did die before me. But he had a long illness and never complained. That was Bob. He never complained. His whole life was never focused on himself. His whole life was focused on his family, his friends, any way he could help people. In fact, his job with Independent Metal, which became Fruoff Corporation, was helping people, actually designing equipment for them, helping them if they had trouble with a customer, helping them learn about new products. He didn't like all of the infighting and all the politics of a major corporation. As long as he was with people and with his customers, he was happy. And when he was here too long and he got involved in all the local stuff that was going on at the office, I would say, don't you have to take a trip somewhere? Because he was not happy then. He was really, really happy when he was helping people. The worst arguments we had would be in stores where he was buying clothes. And I'd want him to buy something, but he'd say, I'll wait till it's on sale, and it'd have to go on sale 2 or 3 times. Sometimes I'd buy things for him, and he'd say, how much did you spend for it? And I lied. I would lie, because he didn't think he deserved anything that would cost more than he felt it should cost. He loved bow ties. That was his signature, was his bow tie. He gave up long ties. Oh, I think the last long tie he wore, but there was one occasion where he did have to wear a long tie. But his signature was his bow ties. And I would see things I would like, and I'd spend $38, $45, and I'd bring them home, and he'd say, that's beautiful. You didn't spend more than $18. And I'd say, I spent a little more. Oh, I spent a whole lot more. But that was not his business. He knew I spent more. He really did. But he just sort of closed a blind eye to it. But for his children and his grandchildren, and for his friends and his family and his brother and his brother Bennett has been my little brother since we met when he was 16 years old. He has been one of my very best friends. I told you he married Gloria Glazer. Gloria and I had a rough time sort of getting our act together, but we did. We became very, very close friends, very good friends. She died much too young. She was so well respected in the symphony community here. They have a son, Adam. Adam just became a father recently. Adam was like my 4th son. He would go skiing with us. In fact, to this day, when we're planning anything, the first thing the boys say is, is he going to be with us? And I say, sure, he's going to. Fine, because the family is not put together, as far as the boys are concerned, unless their 4th brother is there. And he's married to a lovely girl called Susan, whose name is Susan, and they now have my precious great-grandniece, Lillian Ruth. And Bennett is just a great guy. And when Bob was so ill, now he had lost his wife and his mother in the same year, and here he was at this time. I don't want to say holding me up, because that's not, but supporting me. I mean, when I would be very, very down, I could talk to him, and we'd talk. And you can understand that he was very, very distressed at this time about Bob's illness. But we could talk. He was great. But since Bob died, and before Bob died, we moved into this apartment. We sold our home, and I have a lovely apartment. It's large, it's gracious, and I entertain here. My life goes on, and that's the way Bob would want it. He wouldn't want it any other way. And I've become very involved in duplicate bridge, competitive bridge playing. I'm good. I'm not great. I would love to be great, but I'll never be great. But I can get better. I guess that's about what it is. So my life is still filled with people. And people have always, I'm surrounded by beautiful things, but they're not my essence. The important thing to me are my family, the world of friends, and I have to tell you something that my brother Dave said. If you don't learn anything in a day, that day is wasted. Well, I'll add also accomplish. When I go to bed at night, I have to know that I accomplished something that day. Either I learned something, I helped somebody, I created something, I served somebody. The day has to be filled with joy. You have to understand that my cup is not only half full, it runneth over. And I don't mean this in a sweet, I don't know, kind of a trite way. I truly mean it. There's nothing in my life that I would want to change. I was raised in a wonderful family with beautiful brothers and sisters-in-law and nieces and nephews. I was raised by wonderful parents, loving parents, giving, gracious parents. I married the man whom I adored. We lived together for 48 and a half years, and only the last, I would say, 6 months were rough of that marriage. I adored him. He loved me, and that brought 3 beautiful sons into the world. They brought 3 beautiful girls home. They have beautiful families. And, you know, I say families, and just because Pat and Keith don't have children, they have a beautiful family. Please understand that. And I live a beautiful life. I'd like to take some pictures down, and I'd like to show you some of the things that show you a little of my history. So I'm going to ask that you stop the tape now, and I'm going to take some pictures out.
I want to do just one more thing, Sylvia, before we do that. And I promise you we're going to do that.
Okay.
I want you to leave a message for your children and your grandchildren that's kind of special between you and them.
I'm going to fill up with tears. Special to them. You have a beautiful heritage, not only from your father's side of the family, but from your mother's side of your family. They're all wonderful people. Genetically, you've got the best. You're all very bright grandchildren. My grandchildren are all very, very bright. So they have great futures ahead. Remember what I said to you about every day. Learning something, giving something, creating something. And always remember that loving and respecting people, whether it's your spouse, whether it's your children, whether it's the people you work with, is extremely important. Look at them as human beings, not just your kids or your wife or your employees or your boss, but they are all human beings. And always give to your community. Give to your synagogue, give to your greater community, and always, always remember to be generous. Because no matter how little you have, there are always those who have less than you have. Remember the heritage that you come from. As for my boys, I'm so proud of each and every one of you. You're doing what you want to do. You've chosen your paths. And that's important, that you have had that luxury to choose your own paths. Alan, I know how you're doing what you want to do. Keith, you're doing what you want to do. Byron, right now as we speak, I know that things are tough. But I also know the future that you have in front of you. And it's not today, but we always look forward to tomorrow. I think the only other message is your father and I loved you. You were gifts from God. We never thought we were going to have children at all, as I told you. And lo and behold, we have 3 gifts. And we always looked upon you as gifts. Maybe I was overly strict in some ways, or Dad, but it wasn't being overly strict. Is we just expected the best from you. And you're giving us the best. I think that my final message to my children, and my children are Byron, Ellen, Keith, Pat, Alan, Jody. You are my children and my grandchildren. I love you all.
Excellent. I didn't want to bring you to tears, but I needed that in there.
This is a picture of my theatrical debut. It was a first grade. It was a Christmas party. It was a Christmas play. And if you'll notice, Mr. Santa Claus, or Santa Claus, was Sheldon Lincoln, a neighbor, a nice little Jewish boy. And Mrs. Santa Claus was Sylvia Bernstein. That was my theatrical debut. And the young man to your complete left in the upper row was Leonard Stoller. And he lived down on the block. We used to walk to school together. He died some years ago, but we renewed our friendship as adults, and Bob and his wife and I became very good friends. So this was my theatrical debut. This is a picture of Jacob and Ida Bernstein. This was taken at the wedding of Sylvia Bernstein and Robert Wagner. My mother made her own dress. In fact, she made the dresses, made my bridal gown, and she made all of the bridesmaids' gowns and their hats. I have to tell you a little story, one thing about it. When my father signed the ketubah, he signed the ketubah, he put the pen down, and he said, "And I don't want her back." This picture was taken at an anniversary of my aunt and uncle, Nettie and Meyer Katzman. Nettie is my mother's sister, Nettie Gorelick and Meyer Katzman. This was a big anniversary party at the Blackstone Hotel. I'm going to start from the complete right, and there's my brother David. Standing in front of him is his wife, Mickey Krasny, Muriel Krasny Bernstein. Behind, and then I'll just stay right on her. Next to her, standing my father, Jacob Bernstein. Next to him is my mother, Ida Gorelick Bernstein. And next to her is my sister, Eleanor Bernstein Alexander. And next to my sister, Eleanor, is my sister-in-law, Frances Bordy Bernstein. Now, in the back row is, I'll go back to my right, is Robert Wagner, and you'll see how tall he is. And then next to him stands Sylvia Bernstein Wagner. And next to me is Leon Alexander. That's my sister's husband. And then the next one standing on the end is my brother, Robert Bernstein. Now you'll notice that Dave, Bob, Sylvia, and Eleanor have no middle names. My mother figured one name, my mother and dad figured one name was enough for us. Gosh, what a happy group we were, how we enjoyed each other. And this was one of the highlights in the life of Camelot, as I told you about before.
I'd like to introduce Jack and Shirley Wagner. His name was Jackson J. Wagner. He originally was Jacob, but when he went into the world of anti-Semitism, he changed it to Jackson J. And he met Shirley Pollock and determined that she was going to marry him. She had beautiful auburn hair, and her folks were not too crazy about Jack because Jack was not, they didn't have a store, they didn't have a business. He was an engineer. And he was self-educated. I mean, he went to night school, and he had 3 degrees. He was always learned, very, very bright. And this is my precious mother-in-law, Shirley. You can see how beautiful she is. She was of sweet nature, and she couldn't say a bad word about anybody if she tried. I loved her dearly. This is a record of the happiest day of my life. The birth of my sons was great days, but this was perhaps the highlight of my life. This is the day that I became Mrs. Robert Elliott Wagner. And I still wear my wedding band. I wouldn't take it off for anything because I am, and I always will be, Mrs. Robert Elliott Wagner. Bob, tall, handsome, charming, and this grinning, happy Sylvia Bernstein Wagner. The wedding was at the Fontenelle Hotel. As I told you, it was the only air-conditioned hotel in town, and so our guests were comfortable. It was a gorgeous wedding, and I don't think I have too much more to say about that. I want to tell you a little bit about my gown. If you'll notice the Belgian lace on the bottom of my veil, my mother carefully hand sewed every single piece of this veil, and she put the Belgian lace on it. And as we look up toward the dress was a slipper silk satin, very, very simple. And I always wanted a crown, so she took some more of that Belgian lace and she made my crown. Now today, when some of my young people, my family, look at it, they say, "Mom, why are you wearing a soup bowl on your head?" But that day, it was my crown. This is a picture that was taken about 1959 Passover. If I'm off for a year, please forgive me. It was taken in my mother and father's home, and the extended family and a friend were there. I'm going to start from the left standing. That's my brother David, my husband, my brother-in-law Bennett, my father Bennett Wagner, then Jack Wagner, Leon Alexander, my father, Jacob Bernstein. There's Mary Lee. Mary Lee, she was the family, all I can say is she was just great. Then there's Muriel Krasny's father, and next to him is Francis Bordy Bernstein, and hiding is my brother Bob. Then there is Bruce Bernstein, that's my brother Dave's son, and then Mr. Bordy, that's Francis's father. Then I'm going to start back again on the left. And you'll see Karen Alexander, that became Karen Pilley. And then there's Julie. Julie is Bob and Francis's daughter. Next is Jeff, her brother, Jeffrey. And next is Keith Wagner. Next is my sister Eleanor. And then seated in front of my father is Mickey Krasny Bernstein, and next to her is my mother. Hiding behind, next to Sylvia, you can't see her. And then you see Mrs. Krasny, and sitting on Shirley Wagner's lap is Alan. And behind Shirley is Byron. Sitting next to Shirley is Doris Stein, a friend of the family. And then sitting next is Martha Bordy, that is Frances Bordy's. So then you see, my mother always entertained with the extended family. I mean, we were really one mishpacha, and lovingly. The Bordys, the Krasnys, the Bernsteins, and the Wagners were all very close. And of course, we always had a friend for dinner. And our holidays were very, very special. My mother always set a beautiful table with china and silver and candles and crystal, and always a beautiful cloth. And my father led a beautiful Seder, and it was interesting for the children as well. This picture was taken about 1989. At this time, Pat and Keith were not married, so that she's the only one missing from this picture, besides Sylvia. Of course, Sylvia didn't ski. We took our boys skiing every year from the time that Byron was about 10 years old, I think. And Bob and I decided we were all going to learn how to ski. Well, I gave up skiing, but Bob and the family did not. And the children, the boys are all excellent skiers, as was Bob was a good skier too. Bob was, I can tell you this was always one of the happiest times of his life, was when he was on the top of the mountain with his children and his grandchildren. I'll start from the left, and there's Bob smiling his big smile. Next to him is Keith, and next Keith Wagner, and there's Jody Moses Wagner, and standing next to her husband Alan, and next to her is Ellen Alexander Wagner, and next to her is Byron David Wagner. The children, starting from the left, are Rachel Ann Wagner, that's Alan and Jody's daughter, and then there's their son Jason, who is now over 6'2", and off to the right is Alexis, who is now 5'10", and that was happy times on top of the mountain. And Sylvia was down waiting for them to come home with mugs of hot chocolate and pitchers of beer and some hors d'oeuvres. And they'd come down and they'd find it, and we had great good times. This picture was taken on August 11th of 1990. It was a black tie affair, as you can plainly see. What had happened was, it was my 65th birthday. And over the years, I'd always said to Bob, why don't we have a black tie dinner? I'd love to do a nice black tie dinner at the Highland Club. And so then it came to my birthday, and I had given myself a birthday luncheon on my actual birth date of August 4th. So this was a week later. And at the time, Pat, who was standing next to Keith, that real pretty blonde who's standing up there, was not married to Keith, and in fact they weren't even engaged, but she really had become a part of the family. And I said, come on, get in the picture. She said, no. I said, come on, get in the picture. Bob said, come on. Everybody said, come on. So she got in the picture, which was a happy thing, because now we have a picture of the whole family. What happened was, I thought Bob was just nuts for putting these boys in black ties. He said, no, you're going to have a black tie dinner. So I walked into the Highland Country Club, and kind of knowing that something was special was happening. And I figured to go back to the private dining room, and he'd have my old shoe friends and family, but when I walked toward the main ballroom, I heard an orchestra strike up Happy Birthday. The ballroom was filled with gorgeous people, all in black tie, and the women were dressed magnificently and jeweled and coiffed. Oh my gosh, what a surprise. And I can tell you, for the first time in my life, I was speechless for the whole evening. Bob said to me, just once I wanted to set you up. This party was executed and planned with Bob and Jody and my niece Phyllis, and everybody else knew about it. And if you'll see, the little boy on the right is not wearing a bow tie. That's my grandson, Jonathan. He just didn't want to have it. And I said, leave the kid alone. He doesn't have to have one. And you notice he's holding his teddy bear because he was a bit insecure that evening. Let me tell you who's in the picture. I'll start at the left. That's our son, Keith, and next to him is his beautiful wife, now, Pat Kudamelka Wagner. Next is Alan, and next is Jody Moses Wagner, and next is Alexis Lynn Wagner, and her daddy, Byron. And then I'll start at the left again with Rachel Ann Wagner, that is Jody and Alan's oldest, and then my mother-in-law, Shirley, and then, of course, Sylvia Wagner, and on her lap is little Liz, Elizabeth, Gail Wagner. Next is Jason, standing in his beloved Papa's arms, Robert Wagner. Bob was Papa, and I was Bubby. And next is Aaron. Aaron today is over 6'2" and gorgeous like crazy. And my beautiful Ellen. On her lap is Benjamin, and Benjamin's quite a chunk today. And then there is my Jonathan. That is my family. The only one who isn't in the picture, because he wasn't born yet, is Maxwell Solomon. And I will get you a picture of Maxwell Solomon in a bit. Now we have a new picture of Maxwell Solomon Wagner. I told you he was quite an athlete and quite a joy. So I just wanted to show you his picture as well. This picture is extremely important to me, and it is to the boys as well. When Bob knew that he had a diagnosis of brain tumors, he very quietly said to me, Sylvia, there's something I want. And I said, honey, what do you want? I'll do anything. He said, I would like to take my boys on a fishing trip. Just go up to Colorado and with my boys and just fish. And I said, fine. So I called the boys and I told them, put it together. Well, when Bob came back from Mayo's, he had to go through a series of radiation treatments. Well, by the time he finished, it really was too cold to go to Colorado. So where they wound up, as you can see, was at the Homestead, which is a beautiful resort in the southeast. And what they did was they played a lot of golf, they shot skeet, they drank, they ate, they told dirty stories. They had a ball. And if you would ask them, they would also tell you that this was a highlight of their lives. Alan has this framed in a different way. He has it matted, and underneath it says, the Wagner fishing trip. So you can see that Bob is happy. The boys are happy. They're together. Those are my Wagner men. Somebody once approached me and asked, if I would be interested, I think somebody would say, in a little extracurricular activity. I had a laugh. And I said, let me tell you something. I have so many men in my family that I don't need any other men. And these are my men. Even to this day, when I'm alone. Someone said, don't you want a man in your life? And I laugh and I say, a man in my life? My gosh. I've got my 3 sons, I've got my brother-in-law, I've got my beautiful grandsons, I have plenty of friends. I said, no, I have plenty of men in my life. I'm going to close with this. I've shown you a lot about Sylvia Wagner, Bernstein Wagner. I've shown you a lot about my family, my husband's family. You've seen me today, and now you see my children today as adult men, happy men, doing what they want to do, with beautiful wives, beautiful families. And I think that I'm going to bring this session to a close. But God bless everyone who is watching this, no matter what year it is. And I'm sure a lot of it's going to be a long time from now. But just know there was this happy Jewish lady that was born and raised in Omaha, Nebraska, that was educated in Lincoln and lived her married life here. And I will spend my life in joy. And I wish you joy.